For us, for people who were formerly colonized by Russia, Ukraine is the center of resistance. Ukraine is hope. Ukraine is hope that we can be independent.
It's a process where the edge becomes the center. What is happening on the frontier becomes central for the global order.
It's easy to see that Ukraine is the center of events. It's the center of history. It's the center where the great questions of our time and of the future are being decided.
Bonjour, vous regardez l'Ukraine en flammes, une chaîne YouTube en français par l'Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Je m'appelle Tetiana Ogarkova et dans ce projet, on vous raconte comment l'Ukraine résiste face à l'agression russe. L'Europe n'a pas encore retrouvé le rôle et son influence qu'elle jouait avant la Première Guerre mondiale. Avoir des bons systèmes logistiques et juridiques et sociaux, bien sûr, est bénéfique, mais il ne s'agit pas d'une idée propre à l'Europe. C'est l'idée de bien-être, bien sûr, mais l'Europe aujourd'hui doit aspirer à être quelque chose de plus qu'un continent prospère. Pour de nombreux Européens aujourd'hui, la vie dans ce système, bien sûr, est très bénéfique, mais elle constitue un manque de lucidité et de sens. Aujourd'hui, l'Europe représente un espace de la monnaie commune, une société pacifique et une vie sûre, un rêve en quelque sorte d'une vie paisible. Mais cependant, l'Ukraine, qui se trouve en marge de cette Europe prospère et pacifique, suscite aujourd'hui de l'enthousiasme, stimulant à la fois les discussions, les débats très nombreux sur le mode de fonctionnement d'une autre Europe. Dans l'épisode d'aujourd'hui, nous discuterons du rôle de l'Ukraine dans cette nouvelle ordre mondial. Est-ce que l'Ukraine aujourd'hui représente le centre ou bien la périphérie des alliances et des prises de décisions mondiales? Si vous souhaitez en savoir plus, continuez à regarder cette vidéo et n'oubliez pas à vous abonner à notre chaîne YouTube pour ne pas manquer nos vidéos à venir. Les pays occidentaux au passé impérial sont habitués à considérer le centre impérial comme leur principal interlocuteur. Ils réfléchissent à leur propre histoire impériale et évitent de penser dans les termes de sphères d'intérêt concernant leurs anciennes colonies. Cependant, ils appliquent toujours volontiers cet état d'esprit aux anciennes colonies russes. Notre première invitée, Botakos Kasimbekova, qui est professeure assistante en histoire moderne à l'université de Bâle, discutera de l'importance du combat et de la résistance de l'Ukraine pour toutes les anciennes colonies russes. Écoutons-la.
Well, there are so many different ways of thinking about Ukraine, and one of the things that I think when we talk about colonization, recolonization, and when people come to Kyiv, and Kyiv is a wonderful, beautiful city, and for a lot of people comes the question, how come that a city of this magnificence, of this beauty, and of this richness, how come that we can think about it as a periphery? It looks more like an imperial metropole, like an imperial center, like London and Paris, rather than, a periphery in some kind of overseas colony. So there is this question, how come is that Kyiv, that has this grandeur, that has this magnificence, that really radiates this imperial might, how come that we look at it as a periphery? Well, in order to understand that, in order to still understand that Kyiv is that wonderful and big and beautiful European city, and at the same time is subject to colonization, the way to understand these two stories that might not be understandable, is that when Russia colonizes, when Russia tries to become a superpower, it needs Ukraine and it needs Kyiv to enlarge its heartland. What it wants in Ukraine is to be that wonderful European colonial center, and to be that super colonial center that is so close to Europe, and of course it is so close to the Black Sea. It needs this territory. So it pretends that Kyiv is a Russian center, is the center of Russia, because this location allows to imagine itself a European center and a global European center. But what does it means for Ukrainians? That occupation, that colonization, what it means for Ukrainians, despite the fact that Russia imagines that this is the center of Russia, means that Ukrainians have no place in that story. So they needed to be eradicated, they need to be killed, they need to be assimilated, they need to forget themselves. So this kind of colonization is one of the most brutal ones, because Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian nation cannot live in that Russian story. So, and this colonization, this extermination of the Ukrainian people is one of the most violent one. It's one of the most cynical one, because one pretends that one does something good, that one builds maybe a railway, and pretends that this is a gift, whereas actually one steals. So one steals and pretends that one gives something. So this is how one really needs to understand that in the Russian imagination, because it wants to come back close to Europe, to control Western Europe, it needs Ukraine, it needs Kyiv, it needs that city. So from one side, Ukraine, for us, for people who were formerly colonized by Russia, Ukraine is the center of resistance. Ukraine is hope. Ukraine is hope that we can be independent. Ukrainians are giving us hope that we can resist, that we can have our story, that the illegal simply occupation is stealing of our land, stealing of our culture, stealing of our choices, is actually, it's possible to prevent this. So for people who believe in freedom, for people who believe in liberty, Ukraine is the center of resistance.
Ainsi, en temps de guerre, tout aussi bien qu'en temps de paix, l'Ukraine constitue un test de détermination et d'unité du potentiel industriel pour l'Occident. Le conflit qui avait commencé avec l'agression russe contre l'Ukraine soulève 3 questions fondamentales. Première question, quel est le rôle pour les États-Unis dans la sécurité européenne? Deuxième question, les membres européens de l'OTAN seront-ils en mesure d'assumer la responsabilité de la défense de l'Ukraine et du continent européen globalement? Et enfin, la troisième question, quel sera le rôle et la position du reste du monde face à cette guerre que la Russie mène contre l'Ukraine? Les réponses à ces questions seront décisives non seulement pour le sort de l'Ukraine dans cette guerre que la Russie mène contre notre pays, mais tout aussi bien pour la sécurité globale. Notre prochain invité, Volodymyr Yermolenko, philosophe, écrivain, président du PEN d'Ukraine, expliquera comment l'ordre mondial est affecté et sera affecté par les décisions prises par plusieurs membres lors de cette guerre entamée par la Russie contre l'Ukraine. Écoutons-le.
So we're asking a question today whether Ukraine is the center of the borderland of the global process, or its center. And it's a very interesting question because the metaphor of borderlands was dominating the discourse about Ukraine for long decades. But what we are saying now today is that Ukraine is probably a borderland or a frontier, but at the same time a center. It's a process where the edge becomes the center. What is happening on the frontier becomes central for the global order. And there are several ways to think about it. One of the ways is that the front line is actually a confrontation between different value systems. And we look at today's war as a confrontation of value systems. It's not a conflict of civilizations. It's not only the so-called Ukraine war. It's certainly not a war for territories. It's a controversy between value systems, and it has a global impact. So the question is, which system will win? The system which cherishes the individual, or the system which absolutely annihilates the individual? And we can say that Russian system, Chinese system are annihilating the individual. And we certainly don't want the system to be victorious in the 21st century, although there are trends in this way. Another way to look at it is the Ukrainian intellectual and cultural tradition. So there are many things in the Ukrainian cultural tradition which actually can become, very important for different parts of the world. How we connect tradition and modernity, how we connect liberalism and patriotism, how we think about the possibility of freedom despite the slavery around us. How we think about history as something that never ends, and therefore our fight never ends, and therefore even if we lose our fight, and this was the Ukrainian case so many times in history, we can come back to it. And the losses of Ukraine in the 20th century actually led to Ukraine's independence in 1991. And therefore all our suffering today is also, we see that as despite the suffering, is going to a bigger victory. So it's all these questions that I think are very, very important for different parts of the world, not only the Western world, but also the non-Western world, the global South. It's also a question how a culture which was silenced for many centuries is able to speak today.
Bien évidemment, si on prend en considération l'état de l'Europe avant la grande invasion russe, on peut constater qu'il y a des énormes progrès qui ont été faits. Certains pensent que le centre de gravité de l'OTAN se déplace de la France et de l'Allemagne vers l'Est et le Nord. La défense européenne est de plus en plus repensée en Pologne, par exemple dans les pays scandinaves et bien sûr en Ukraine. La Grande-Bretagne, dans cette époque post-Brexit, a également montré qu'elle pouvait encore être à l'avant-garde de cette Europe de défense en termes de défense justement et de sécurité. Le philosophe, journaliste et homme politique portugais Bruno Maçães discutera des centres d'influence changeants dans le monde moderne. Écoutons-le.
We are here at the Book Arsenal and we are discussing questions of political geography and political history. Is Ukraine the center? And I think it's easy to see that Ukraine is the center of events. It's the center of history. It's the center where the great questions of our time and of the future are being decided. If you talk about physical space, then perhaps people are more inclined to think of Ukraine as a periphery because of the location, but also because it is not part of the great alliances that define the West. So in a way, it's a question of deciding what is more important, history or physical geography. And I think clearly the big questions are decided in this movement of history, of decision-making, facing the risks of the future. There's a sense that Ukraine is more aware of what is being decided, and so from a subjective point of view is more at the center, where in many parts of the West, they don't live political reality as it actually is, so they feel farther away than Ukraine is from the historical center. That's how I think about it, at least. And then the second question is, the world has become very different, much more global. Asia is much more important. And I talked a bit about how Ukraine is also at the center of a new political geography. We saw that this war, perhaps differently from the past, involves the role of China and of India, much more important role than even during the Cold War. I see President Zelensky very aware of this, very concerned that China could take Russia's side and making an effort to prevent that. I think he thinks that it can be prevented. So also from the point of view of political geography, Ukraine in its geographical location is very much at the center of this larger space that includes India, Indonesia and China.
C'était l'épisode de l'Ukraine en Flammes, une chaîne YouTube en français par l'Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Je m'appelle Tetiana Ogarkova et nous n'allons pas tarder à enregistrer et diffuser d'autres épisodes. Dans la description sous cette vidéo, vous trouverez des informations utiles sur la manière dont vous pouvez aider l'Ukraine à continuer sa résistance face à l'agression russe. Si vous trouvez notre travail utile, n'hésitez pas à commenter ou de partager cette vidéo. Restez avec nous et soutenez l'Ukraine. Slava Ukraine!